Part 3. Alright, let's see. We're making pretty good timing on this series. Oh, whoops. Alrighty then, well, it's better late than never, right? I'm just gonna need a little bit of a refresher. So in game 1, that was when Derrick Rose decided that he was no longer a rookie and he was just gonna take over an entire playoff game against the defending champs, the injured defending champs nonetheless, but the defending champs. 36 points, clutch free throws, and the baby Bulls walked out of the Garden with game 1. That was only thought to be a fluke, however, because the Celtics had a history, the 2008 playoffs, of taking teams lightly when they did not have championship aspirations like themselves. At least that's what it looked like. So when game 2 came around, everything was supposed to be set back right in the universe until Ben Gordon decided he was the best shooting guard in the league. 6 for 11 on threes, 42 points, and potential dagger after potential dagger. Boston just escaping with their lives off of a Ray Allen fling. That was the part where I ripped my Pierce jersey off and tossed it at the ground because I was so invested into this game as if my life depended on the results. It may or may not have. Yet being the naive child that I was, I felt totally safe. I had no concern for the fact that my team had just very nearly dropped both their home games to a 7 seed. In fairness, game 3 did back that theory up. It wasn't necessarily close. It seemed that Boston had finally found their swagger and were probably going to gentleman's sweep. That's when game 4 happened, and after a grueling double OT affair, the series was knotted up at 2 apiece, headed back to Boston for a game 5 despite the best possible effort from the Celtics starting lineup. Triple-double for Rondo, 29 for Pierce, 28 for Allen, double-double from Glenn Davis, and out of all things, a Kendrick Perkins masterclass. If the young Chicago team could survive that, it had become quite clear they could survive anything. Alright, that should do it. That should about catch us up to where we were before I had to go stand in that long line at Target. Heading into game 5, there had been 33 ties, 72 lead changes, 3 overtimes, and the games had finished with point spreads of 2, 3, 21, and 3. The part that they never really tell you about this series is how it was much closer to a 4-5 matchup than 2-7. On Chicago's side, they weren't using that same roster that had played most of the season and gotten them to that lowly 500 record. As a matter of fact, after trading for Brad Miller and John Salmons around February, they would go on to a 17-11 record through their last 28 games. And then on Boston's side, on top of the Kevin Garnett injury, they were missing numerous pieces that helped them make the 2008 run. James Posey had moved on, PJ Brown retired, Leon Powe had a torn ACL, which essentially meant the only size the Celtics had down low were Big Baby Davis and Kendrick Perkins. If either of those two were sitting for any extended amount of time, they were missing any consistent source of defense and rebounding or scoring from those positions. Behind Rondo, Allen, and Pierce, it did not get much better, as if they went to sit, Doc Rivers had the whopping options of Eddie House, Tony Allen, or Brian Scalabrine. Hopefully that little synopsis makes it clear how this series got even more competitive as it drug on. Game 5 began. Surprisingly enough, Boston's young point guard had been the superstar of the series, tallying up 40 assists and only 7 turnovers. This all the while averaging a triple-double and scoring 28 of his 36 series field goals inside the paint. For that reason, he would go on to play just about every available minute in this game. And there would be a lot of them, as the Bulls came out immediately to set the tone, showing this was not going to be some momentum-filled cakewalk fueled by the crowd.
Off to Thomas, who slams it in with a sledgehammer right over Big Baby.
If it hadn't been clear in the first 4 battles, the Bulls were not scared of a damn thing. A philosophy set by what had become their emotional leader of the series, Ben Gordon. In the heat of the battle in game 4, he'd sustained a grade 2 hamstring strain, which meant there was some tearing, but as sports doctors seem to often say, quote, it couldn't get any worse. And so he showed up, figuring even if he'd be a decoy, he terrorized the Celtics enough by now that he could be an effective one. Also terrorizing the Celtics, their own bench, whom they were getting no production from, practically leaving the starters out to dry as they had to produce on offense and be as physical as possible on defense. By the end of the first, the Celtics had tried to pull away multiple times, yet the Bulls had stuck right there with them, taking their best shots as they had the entire series. Which made one thing abundantly clear: they probably weren't going to get this done in Chicago if they couldn't get it done here. For the slander that Kendrick Perkins gets in 2021, he was quite literally the X factor of the greatest playoff series of all time. And albeit that it was his most important contribution, it was not just defense. By the start of the second quarter, he'd been flirting with a double-double, which was out of necessity. If he wasn't going to score under the basket and grab rebounds, Mikey Moore wasn't coming off the bench to do it, and Kevin Garnett was in street clothes. Meanwhile, oddly enough, the X factor for Chicago had been D Rose, as you pretty much knew what you were getting from Ben Gordon, even if you were just learning to expect it. However, the numbers did not lie, as in their 2 wins, their standout rookie was averaging 30 points and 10 assists. Meanwhile, in the losses, under 10, with just shy of 5 assists and shooting 36% from the field. This all but backed up what everyone could see. If Rondo got the best of him, the Celtics got the best of them. Yet, something else had been brewing for Chicago, possibly the double X factor? Kirk Hinrich, who in this game had been the biggest reason the Bulls were able to withstand the punches Boston was throwing. Behind D Rose and Ben Gordon, they had a firecracker coming off the bench. On the other hand, for the Celtics, the corpse of Stephon Marbury seemed reluctant to even take a shot. This all combined to give the Bulls their second quarter run, giving them their biggest lead of 4. And while not much, the crowd was anxious, the Bulls bench was hyped, and there was a clear momentum shift. The Garden's beloved had gone from seemingly pulling away with an easy Game 5 win to down at halftime. This all to a team that nobody expected to be competitive, with Hinrich, Salmons, and Rose being a combined 7 of 24. Yet they were still up. The bench scoring was 14-5 Chicago's way, and if just one starter would have joined Kirk Hinrich, it could have been the end. Luckily enough for Boston, the momentum pendulum would swing their way one more time in the half to keep them alive.
1 second left. Good if it goes. Rondo hits it at the buzzer.
Obviously, with Ben's situation, I'm sure you thought you might get more minutes tonight. How did that affect your preparation for tonight?
I really didn't. I just wanted to be ready. I always try to stay ready. And right now, we're just doing a good job of fighting. You know, we got different lineups out there, and we're doing a good job of sharing the ball and fighting for our lives right now.
Rajon Rondo fall-away buzzer beaters were unfortunately in short supply, and so were Ray Allen contributions, as he would airball to bring his tally to 2 of 7 for the night, and then foul Ben Gordon on a 3, who hadn't been able to get much going on the hamstring. By around the 7-minute mark, Chicago hadn't landed a field goal in over 4 minutes, and their next would just about sum up Boston's luck for the game.
It's going right. It's a disappointment to the coaching staff. Look at this, a tip ball
by Rondo,
and Rose gets the layup. That was a very fortunate bounce for the Bulls.
By the 3-minute mark, Chicago had wrestled back the lead and had things to say about it, and by the 1 minute, impending doom, as Ben Gordon had hit his first shot since the first quarter. Toward the end, this was a full-fledged battle, without either side giving so much as an inch.
With his 4th rebound, drives by Rondo, dives inside. That's a Boston foul with 1.1 to play in the third.
This game could have been avoided, yet here the Celtics were, in Boston, down 4 at the start of the 4th, after ending the 3rd quarter flat, and their co-stars, Ray Allen and Pierce, had 6 and 11 points respectively. There's one of Chicago's trade pieces sitting smack in the corner at the beginning of the 4th. Bang! A stretch 5, just what the Celtics needed to deal with. With around 11 minutes remaining, the men in red had assumed their biggest lead of the game at the most crucial point of it. The bench scoring tally was now 22-5 in Chicago's favor. And with Green not even getting production from their most important starters, where were they going to find offense to make this comeback? Around 9.5 left, and they hadn't scored in over 3 minutes, facing their biggest deficit of the game, and now their biggest deficit of the series. Courtesy of a highlight play by, once again, the Bulls' trade piece. He was not a starter, by the way, and producing role players is something the Celtics just did not seem to have. This one was getting pretty close to its end. The Ray Allen and Ben Gordon subplot hadn't died, by the way. It was just that neither of them were looking particularly hot, especially Ray, who had gotten himself in mega foul trouble just trying to contain Ben Gordon. Chasing him around, hanging on for dear life, it severely limited how effective he could be on both sides of the ball. And with the other wing, Pierce, not being able to find his shot, the comeback was left in the hands of Rondo and Glenn Davis. After having played behind from double digits all that time, within 2 minutes they were out on a 7-0 run, capped off by number 20 himself, who would experience the highest of highs and immediately after the lowest of lows.
Out to Rondo. Screen by Perkins, opening up a 3. Kendrick Perkins laid the 1. And Ray Allen knocks in the triple. And Boston is on a 7-0 run.
It's interesting, Vinny Del Negro will let his team play through this. He's been criticized a lot this year, taking too many timeouts. If it's a double foul, Ray Allen is out of the game. He and Brad Miller got tied up on that play, and if it's a double foul, Ray Allen is gone.
The Celtics now had the momentum, but what they didn't have was their sharpshooter and one of their most important scorers. If for no other reason, especially this game, to run around and spread the floor with the threat of 3-pointers. So, given these Celtics struggles, it wasn't likely momentum was going to be enough. And if the situation was not already appropriately grim, they wouldn't even hang on to that, as Ben Gordon and John Salmons would hit 3s on consecutive possessions, keeping the lead at 5 with around 3 minutes remaining. Paul Pierce, who'd still been struggling, coughed up the ball in what could have been a game-sealing possession if Rose hadn't made a rookie mistake. He was clearly going for the kill via a momentum play and instead left the door open just slight enough. And if he didn't realize it, Vinny Del Negro did. Chicago was officially hanging on to this Game 5 victory for dear life.
Salmons makes his move on Davis and hands off to Miller, who gets by Perkins. Rebound by Salmons. That's a fresh shot clock. And Rose on the wing. Mismatch against Davis. He'll try to exploit. Nice rotation. Open Salmons. Closed by Davis. The missed three. Another offensive rebound, this time by Rose.
In this middle pick and roll, they better not switch and let Kendrick Perkins attack.
No, the screen. Rose, the dive inside for two. Derrick Rose for 12.
In the Garden, the third time was a charm. Boston had given up not one, not two, but 3 possessions, as there had been practically no rest for the guys on the floor given the lack of bench production, which Rondo, per usual, would make up on his own.
John Salmons had it rejected by Perkins. Here comes Rondo. Rose back defensively. Here comes Pierce by Rose by Heinrich.
The game was tied, as these Celtic veterans were peaking at just the right time. Meanwhile, growing pains from a rookie who had accumulated his 6th turnover at the worst possible moment of this game. It actually been his 2nd time in a row going down, only saved by the fact he threw it off a Rondo the first. Then, back to a Celtics veteran in the corner who was not named Ray Allen.
Shot clock is down to 7. Snaps it outside. Mulberry. Rondo with the little floater off the baseline.
Not only was it not Ray Allen, this was not New York, and that was not prime stuff on Marbury. The lack of confidence said it all, which is something Ben Gordon did not struggle with, particularly in this series.
Rebound. A difference of a second. Heat clock and shot clock. Gordon on the side. Marbury defending.
What is he doing?
Oh, he just hit it! He just gave Chicago the lead! That's what he was doing! Oh my goodness! Can you believe it? With 16.6 to play in regulation. Oh my goodness, what a shot by Gordon!
Gordon, after a relatively quiet game, had put in his 7th fourth quarter point, and possibly the 2 that would send them back to Chicago up 3-2. This time, there was no Ray Allen for the answer, and for all intents and purposes, Boston was on the brink of elimination.
Here's Pierce. Rose defending for the top. Timeout Chicago 10.5. Paul Pierce has got 20 points.
If there were no screens to be ran for a sharpshooter to seal the deal in this one, there was still the truth. Just like there was still Ben Gordon and 10.5 seconds remaining in the game.
Gordon for the game. Overtime. And this will be the 4th overtime in this series.
If it hadn't been a grueling enough challenge just to get this to OT, the Celtics were now playing small to match Chicago, starting Stephon Marbury and Tony Allen, who were both killing space on their own, not to mention the lack of Rondo shooting, meaning they were almost exclusively relying on defense, which wasn't terrible given that by this point Kendrick Perkins had poured in 7 blocks. There had been nothing even close to resembling control for either squad until around halfway through the 2-minute mark, and KG was loving it, just itching to be out there. His intensity had clearly been leaking over to Tony Allen, who could be seen shadowing Ben Gordon shortly after a timeout. He was not the Allen that could change a game on offense, but he was sure to give Ben Gordon more problems than Ray ever did, which by the way did not mean Gordon didn't have that hint of Kobe left over in him.
Gordon doubled by Rondo. Banks it in! What a dive by Gordon!
From that point of absolute ridiculousness, the lead would change 2 more times and then Pierce would once again come alive, apparently having saved every drop of his offense for the clutch moments he knew were inevitably coming.
This is where Paul Pierce wants to go to work. This is where his bread and butter is. Right in the middle of the floor. Go quickly, pull up and shoot your shot.
Salmons defending. Paul Pierce has got 24 points in 50 minutes.
After all the control the Bulls had exhumed in this game, would they even have the emotional energy to take this back to Chicago to tie the series if they didn't have the lead? Everybody in the building at this point knew who it was going to, including Tony Allen, who by now had made it his personal mission to apply the clamps to the Mamba clone.
Gordon defended by Allen. This is a 3 deflected by Allen, and that is a foul on Tony Allen.
And you say why? Why even risk? That's such a degree of difficulty shot. He has him buried, and then he gets his body, clearly got him with the body.
From that question alone, it had become very difficult to believe Doug Collins was commentating every other game of this series. Barely a minute had passed since Gordon drained a shot that he threw up just to avoid a travel. If it left Gordon's hands in the clutch unattended, it was probably going in. And Tony just wasn't going to leave that up to chance, rightfully so. Thus, the game was tied. And Boston had exactly one shooter on this floor they could trust with 27 seconds remaining. Doc knew it, Vinny knew it, the crowd knew it, every player on the court knew it. Which begs the question, especially after what had happened in this overtime period, who let him go one-on-one?
Corner and try not to give him any space.
It's Pierce. Is this the dagger? 3.4 to play. Paul Pierce with a huge shot. He's got 26.
Paul Pierce had put in 15 points between the fourth quarter and OT. He'd hit that exact shot in the 2 possessions before this. But that was just how much Chicago did not want to go back to the United Center down 3-2 after the struggle of this game. They couldn't even dare to live with Boston bench players who had done nothing most of the game, taking an open shot. They couldn't even live with it being Rondo, who had the superstar touch but did not have a great shooting touch. And now, if they couldn't win it or send it to a double OT, they'd have to find a way to live with the truth.
Rose and Gordon, the Chicago 5. Marbury has come in the game. Miller, a wide open lane to the rack. Knocked away, there was a block.
Foul.
And a foul. And a foul.
Once again, the trade piece. There were 2 sent to the corner with Ben Gordon because that's just how much they trusted his shot making ability. Or feared it. There was one on the inbound and nobody in the middle. Which was crazy because if Miller had the awareness, he had a wide open Ben Gordon with over 2 seconds left. But now with 2 seconds left, he had a bloody mouth off of a shot that probably should have been a flagrant foul and a chance to send this to a second overtime.
Tonight, his first free throw attempt.
One man on a grade 2 hamstring could only do so much. Same goes for a man who was probably seeing 3 rims and just could not hit the middle one. And the expression said it all. With no timeouts remaining, regardless of what was to happen next, it was likely wraps. The Celtics were still tasked with finishing the job though, because the thing that happens in the greatest playoff series of all time is one unnecessary suspenseful moment after one unnecessary suspenseful moment. Back to back to back. That's what makes it the greatest.
Left on the court is Paul Pierce, fans on the first. Right from the free throw line with his 26 points. He is 3 of 4. He did. Davis has the ball. And the Boston Celtics will take a 3-2 lead in this incredible series.
Not even a chance. Davis had pulled down his 7th board, and with it, a 3-2 lead for the Boston Celtics headed back to Chicago for a possible closeout. This brutal battle of titans had pushed the amount of ties up to 48. Lead changes to 85. The newest point spread, 2 and 4 total overtimes. Boston's bench scored 5 points the entirety of the game. The rest of the production being picked up by Paul Pierce and Rajon Rondo, and Glenn Davis for that matter, who had joined Rondo in bringing them back from that 4th quarter deficit, and the X Factor, Kendrick Perkins, who had put in 16 points, 19 rebounds, 7 blocks. Or, as Marv Albert had put it,
Kendrick Perkins laid the wood.
However, to put it into this, he would have to lay more. Because if one thing had been proven, Chicago just was not the team to be rattled. They'd lost close games here already. They were the only team to be blown out. They'd taken everything the Celtics had to offer and showed back up each and every time. As had Ray Allen, by the way, with Game 5 not being the first terrible performance he'd have to bounce back from. And bounce back he would.